Hello and welcome to US History Mythbusters. Today we will be looking at some misconceptions about US history and breaking them down to decide whether they are plausible or not using evidence. The specific myth we will be discussing today is as follows. The political atmosphere immediately following the American Revolution was one of peace, unity, and compromise. Or in plainer terms, after the American Revolution everyone got along well and there was no arguing or fighting and everyone was friends. In order to get a better understanding of this myth, we will be looking at some of the first political parties that rose up just after the American Revolution was completed. These two parties were called the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, and they had very conflicting ideas of how America should be run. Without going too in-depth, allow me to give a brief explanation of each party. The Federalists wanted a strong central government that was more powerful than the individual state governments, and it was founded by extremely wealthy men such as George Washington and Alexander Hamilton. The Anti-Federalists, however, were more concerned with states' rights and the rights of the individual. In modern times, the Anti-Federalists are sort of seen as the People's Party, who looked after the lower classes and the working people. Some notable Anti-Federalists would be Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. The main debate between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists was whether or not to ratify the Constitution of America. Just to be clear, to ratify is to put in place. To prevent chaos, the Federalists wanted to ratify the Constitution quickly so they could establish a powerful government early on. The Anti-Federalists, however, were extremely concerned with the rights of the people and were afraid, should the Constitution be ratified, that the individual would lose their rights. While they weren't completely against having a Constitution, the Anti-Federalists wanted to make sure that the rights of the individual were well defined. That should be enough background information to get us going. To properly bust this myth, we will be looking at some evidence in the form of an essay written by Professor Elizabeth D. Moneymaker. The essay is entitled Ratification of the Bill of Rights. Throughout the essay, the author describes the ways the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists attempted to upend each other by creating propaganda and attempting to depict the other party in a negative light. As I briefly mentioned earlier, the main argument between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists was mostly concerning the Constitution of America. At the time, America had a similar document called the Articles of Confederation, which dictated the rights that the individuals would have, as well as governmental roles in people's lives. The Articles of Confederation also gave each individual state their own sovereign rights, and basically said that each state was its own governing body. However, the states maintain a close relationship and a common defense force. The Articles of Confederation, however, were not very effective, and the United States of America was in complete disarray. The Federalists saw the need for a more powerful and well-defined document. The people now called Anti-Federalists, however, were afraid that the new document would limit their rights. So almost right out the gate there was some animosity between the two parties. In fact, the name Anti-Federalist was actually a pejorative term meant to make the people now called Anti-Federalists seem unpatriotic. Both parties immediately set out to prove the other wrong. The better organized Federalists did this by writing a series of 85 newspaper articles, which were eventually published as one document called The Federalist. While some critics called The Federalist blatant propaganda, it was more or less effective in convincing people to vote on ratifying the Constitution. Keep in mind that at the time, the United States was not a solid country. It was more of an alliance between 13 separate governmental bodies. The Anti-Federalists were horrified at the concept of destroying the rights of the states and creating a more unified government. One of the Anti-Federalists' major concerns was that the president would become more of a king than a voted-in ruler. The Anti-Federalists expressed this fear in their own document entitled Letters from a Federal Farmer. This document was far less effective in convincing people, and subsequently the Federalists won and the Constitution was ratified, but not after a lengthy debate. What really caused the Anti-Federalists to acquiesce and allow the ratification of the Constitution was the Bill of Rights. For those of you unfamiliar with the Bill of Rights, it's basically just our personal amendments and our individual rights. The Bill of Rights set many Anti-Federalists at ease because their personal rights as individuals were clearly defined, and that the Constitution could not take those away. So now let's actually take a look at busting the myth. So just based on this evidence, it's pretty clear that the early stages of American politics were marred by propaganda, insults, and other unfriendly gestures. With such a large gap in ideals between these two parties, it is hard to call their relationship unified and one of compromise. On the other hand, there was very little violence concerning this issue, and no civil wars were fought over ratifying the Constitution. Most of the conflict taking place was mostly just standard political fare that we usually still see today. So is this myth really busted? Well, that really depends on your perception of peace and unity. However, for the purposes of this video, we will call the myth busted. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope to see you next time.